Don't make her walk, the black man said, just seconds before the girl rose from her wheelchair. Until that moment, the launch of Hayes Motion Lab's newest mobility system had unfolded exactly as Caroline Hayes had planned. White lights washed over the glass auditorium. Cameras faced the stage. Investors filled the front rows in dark suits, their applause measured and expensive. Beside Caroline sat her 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, small beneath a pale blue dress, both hands resting tightly on the wheels of her chair. Caroline stood at the podium with the calm expression that had carried her through hostile board meetings, failed mergers, and 3 years of questions she could never answer. Her phone vibrated against the lectern. She ignored it. Across the room, Isaiah Brooks noticed what no one else did. He was supposed to be checking emergency exits, not watching the CEO's daughter. His faded work jacket carried no impressive title, only a stitched security badge and the faint smell of black coffee. But he saw Sophie's fingers curl. He saw her shoulders rise. He saw her eyes leave the stage and search the room for a way out. Then a technician activated the demonstration platform. A sharp warning tone rang through the auditorium. Sophie flinched. Another light flashed. Photographers leaned closer. Caroline turned toward her daughter, still smiling for the crowd. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. Sophie did not hear her. Her breathing had become quick and shallow. Isaiah moved, but not toward the child. He crossed to the nearest control panel and silenced the alarm. Then he pulled a metal display stand away from the side aisle, clearing a straight path to the exit. "Sir, step back," an event coordinator hissed. Isaiah barely looked at him. "Give her room." His voice was low, certain, the kind of voice that did not fight noise. It made noise feel unnecessary. Caroline saw him then, a tall black man in an old jacket, kneeling 20 feet from her daughter as though he belonged there. Her expression hardened. "Who is that?" she asked. No one answered quickly enough. Isaiah removed his jacket and laid it flat on the carpet between himself and Sophie. "Hey." Simple dark shape. A place for her eyes to rest. He kept both hands visible on his knees. He did not call her name. He did not smile. He only breathed. "For in," he murmured. "Hold. For out." Sophie stared at him. The auditorium seemed to tighten around the silence. Caroline stepped away from the podium. "Sophie." The girl's right foot shifted. At first, Caroline thought it had slipped from the footrest. Then Sophie placed it on the floor. Her left foot followed. A sound moved through the audience. Not quite a gasp, not yet applause. Caroline stopped breathing. Her daughter pushed against the arms of the wheelchair. Her knees trembled. Isaiah remained still. "You don't owe anyone another step," he said. Sophie stood. For one impossible second, she balanced beneath the lights while hundreds of people watched. Then she moved. 1 step. 2. Faster now. Her pale blue dress swayed around her knees as she crossed the carpet, past the abandoned jacket, and ran directly into Isaiah Brooks' waiting arms. Caroline's phone slipped from her hand and struck the stage. She did not look down. Her daughter had just done what doctors, therapists, machines, and money had failed to make her do. But Sophie had not run to her mother. She had run to a stranger. For half a second, no one moved. Then the room broke apart. Cameras lifted. Voices collided. Security personnel rushed toward the stage while Caroline stepped down so quickly that one heel caught against the edge of the platform. She recovered without looking away from Sophie. Her daughter stood with both arms around Isaiah Brooks, trembling against the faded fabric of his shirt. Isaiah did not hold her tightly. One hand rested lightly between her shoulders. The other remained open at his side. "Sophie," Caroline called. The girl turned her face, but did not let go. Something cold entered Caroline's expression. Fear had always worn expensive clothes on her. It looked like authority. "Get away from my daughter." Isaiah slowly lowered his hand. "She needs the room to stay quiet." "I did not ask what she needs." The words came sharper than Caroline intended. Around them, investors watched with open curiosity. A photographer leaned into the aisle for a better angle. Sophie flinched at the click of the camera. Isaiah looked toward the man. "Please lower that." "Security," Caroline said louder now. 2 officers reached Isaiah. He did not resist. He did not explain. He simply shifted his weight so Sophie would not be startled by their approach. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "your daughter is still standing. Do not turn this into something she has to survive." Caroline froze. No employee spoke to her that way. Not in her building. Not in front of the board. Grant Holloway appeared at her shoulder, his silver tie perfectly straight despite the disorder around him. "We need to clear the floor," he said. "The press is already recording." Caroline barely heard him. Sophie's knees had begun to shake. Isaiah noticed first. He crouched, leaving several feet between them. "You can sit whenever you want," he told her. "No one is grading you." Sophie looked toward the wheelchair behind her. It seemed impossibly far away now. Caroline moved to help, but Sophie recoiled. The movement was small. It still landed like a door closing. Caroline stopped with her hands suspended in the air. Isaiah reached for neither of them. "Bring the chair closer," he said. Grant frowned. "You are not in a position to give instructions." Isaiah removed his security badge and placed it carefully on the carpet. "Then consider that my last one." One of the officers rolled the chair forward. Sophie lowered herself into it, breathing hard but evenly. Only then did Isaiah stand. Caroline moved between him and her daughter. "Who authorized you to approach her?" "No one." "What did you say to her before she stood?" "Very little." "What did you do?" Isaiah glanced at Sophie, not at the cameras. "I made sure she could see the exit." Grant bent to pick up the badge. Isaiah Brooks. Facilities safety. 6 months with the company. His tone made the job sound smaller than the plastic card in his hand. "Escort him out." Effective immediately. Sophie's fingers closed around Isaiah's sleeve. "No." The single word was soft, but it silenced everyone near the stage. Caroline stared at her daughter. Sophie had spoken during therapy at home and in private lessons, but never with that kind of certainty. "He stays," Sophie whispered. Isaiah looked down at her hand. Something passed through his face and disappeared before Caroline could name it. He knelt once more. "I have to go for now." Sophie's grip tightened. "You will come back?" Isaiah paused. Beyond the glass walls, the city shone beneath a clean afternoon sky, unaware that an entire room was waiting on one man's answer. "I will not disappear," he said. Sophie released him. Security walked him toward the doors. Caroline watched her daughter follow every step with her eyes. Then she looked down at the abandoned jacket on the carpet and realized the stranger had left without asking for praise, money, or even his job back. That frightened her more than anything else. By 7 that evening, the auditorium had been emptied, the stage lights dimmed, and every public statement replaced with 3 carefully approved sentences from corporate communications. Caroline sat alone in the security control room with Grant Holloway and the head of building operations. 12 monitors covered the wall in front of them. On one screen, Sophie stood frozen beneath the lights. On another, Isaiah crossed the side aisle before anyone else understood there was a problem. Caroline watched the footage again, then again. Each replay removed one assumption and left behind something harder to dismiss. Isaiah had never called Sophie toward him. He had never reached for her wheelchair. He had noticed the warning tone before the event staff did. He had silenced the nearest speaker, moved a display stand away from the emergency path, and asked the photographers to step back. His movements were economical. No panic. No performance. He had created space and then placed himself at the far end of it. "Slow it down," Caroline said. The operations chief adjusted the recording. Isaiah appeared frame by frame, lowering his jacket to the carpet and turning his body slightly sideways so he would seem less imposing. His eyes moved once toward the exit, once toward Sophie, then across the room as if measuring every person between them. Grant folded his arms. He violated procedure. Caroline did not look at him. He prevented a public panic. He interfered with a company demonstration. He helped my daughter. The room went quiet. On the screen, Sophie placed one foot on the floor. Caroline leaned closer. She had seen that moment in real time, but fear had covered it with noise. Now there was no applause, no shouting, no need to protect the company. Only a child making a choice. Isaiah did not encourage her. He did not lift his hands. He simply breathed, slow enough for her to follow. Caroline pressed her fingers against her lips. Why would a facilities safety employee know how to do that? The operations chief opened Isaiah's personnel file. Basic first aid certification. Emergency management training. Nothing unusual. Grant glanced at the page. He worked warehouse security before this. Maintenance coordination before that. No advanced degree. Caroline looked at the years listed beside his employment history. Something did not fit. The dates began recently, then stopped. Before that was an 18-year absence. "What is missing?" she asked. "Could be incomplete records." "In my company," Incomplete records are complete problems. She entered her executive authorization code. A second file opened, but most of the text was restricted. Department of the Navy. Special Warfare Personnel. Service history sealed by federal classification. Grant straightened. The operations chief stopped touching the keyboard. Caroline read the visible lines slowly. Isaiah Daniel Brooks. Enlistment at age 19. Multiple overseas assignments. Advanced medical response. Civilian evacuation training. Team leadership. The remaining sections were blocked. At the bottom, one phrase remained visible. Honorably discharged at personal request. Caroline stared at the screen. The quiet man in the faded jacket had spent nearly 2 decades in a world built around danger. Yet he had spoken to Sophie as though the greatest skill he possessed was patience. A Navy veteran, Grant said. That gives us a clean public angle. Former service member helps the chief executive officer's daughter during an emotional moment. We could contain this. Caroline turned toward him. Contain what? The story. My daughter is not a story. Grant's expression barely changed. By morning, she will be. Half the audience recorded it. Caroline looked back at the frozen image of Isaiah kneeling 20 feet from Sophie. He had known where every exit was. He had known how to lower his presence, how to read a room, how to calm a frightened child without touching her. But he had left the building like a man who expected nothing in return. Caroline reached for her phone and called Human Resources. Reverse the termination, she said. Then she paused. No, do not contact him yet. She ended the call and opened the security footage one final time. Isaiah's face filled the center monitor. Calm, watchful, impossible to categorize. Caroline had spent her entire career learning how to read people before they could surprise her. For the first time in years, she realized she had misread someone completely. The next morning, Caroline found Isaiah Brooks in a corner booth at a diner 6 blocks from Roosevelt Middle School, pouring syrup over a stack of pancakes for a girl with bright eyes and 2 uneven braids. He looked different without the faded work jacket. Less like an employee, more like a father who had learned to make 10 quiet minutes feel protected. Caroline paused inside the doorway, one hand gripping a leather folder while her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Isaiah saw her reflection in the window before he looked up. His expression did not change. Miss Hayes. The girl beside him studied Caroline with open curiosity. This is my daughter, Nia, Isaiah said. Nia, this is Caroline Hayes. Nia set down her fork. Sophie's mother? Caroline blinked. You know about Sophie? My dad told me a little. Not the private parts. Isaiah slid out of the booth. You could have called. I thought you might not answer. You were right. There was no anger in his voice. That made the truth harder to defend against. Caroline sat across from them and placed the folder on the table. Inside was a consulting agreement, a reinstatement letter, and a check with the amount left blank. Isaiah glanced at the pages but did not touch them. I want you to work with Sophie, Caroline said. Privately. No press. No board involvement. You can name your compensation. Nia looked from the blank check to her father. Isaiah stirred his black coffee once, though there was nothing in it to dissolve. Your daughter does not need me as a treatment. She walked to you. She walked once. Caroline's jaw tightened. You saw what happened. I did. That is why I am telling you not to turn one moment into a promise her body may not be ready to keep. The diner continued around them. Plates touched tables. A coffee machine hissed behind the counter. No one there cared that Caroline controlled a company valued in the billions. For the first time that morning, she could hear how tired she was. The specialist said progress was possible, she said. Then keep the specialists. Keep the physical therapy. Keep every medical appointment that helps her. But do not make that walk the price of everyone's hope. Caroline looked down at the contract. I am trying to help my child. I know. Isaiah's voice softened, but only slightly. That is what makes this dangerous. She raised her eyes. Explain that. You love her so much that every room becomes a test. Every movement becomes data. Every good day becomes evidence that the bad days should be over. Caroline said nothing. Her phone vibrated again. This time the sound seemed louder than the dishes and conversation around them. Isaiah looked toward it, then back at her. Sophie did not walk because I fixed her. She walked because, for a few seconds, nobody asked her to prove anything. Caroline pushed the blank check closer. There must be something you want. Isaiah closed the folder and returned it to her. There is. Stop letting people watch her struggle like it belongs to them. Nia had been quiet until then, folding the paper wrapper from her straw into smaller and smaller squares. She placed the tiny shape beside Caroline's untouched coffee. "Can I ask you something?" Caroline nodded. "Do you ever talk to Sophie without looking at your phone?" The question was not cruel. That was why it reached places accusation could not. Caroline's hand moved toward her coat pocket by habit, then stopped. Across the table, Isaiah did not rescue her from the silence. He simply waited. Caroline removed the phone, turned it face down beside the folder, and looked at Nia. "Not often enough," she admitted. Nia gave a small nod, as if honesty was a beginning. Outside, a yellow school bus pulled to the curb. Isaiah stood and helped his daughter into her backpack. Before leaving, he looked at Caroline once. "If you want Sophie to trust the room," he said, "she has to know her mother is actually in it." Then he walked Nia toward the door, leaving Caroline alone with a blank check, a silent phone, and the first answer money had never been able to buy. 3 days later, the rehabilitation garden at Hayes Motion Labs was closed to employees, therapists, photographers, and anyone carrying a clipboard. Caroline had agreed to every condition Isaiah set. No medical demonstration, no progress report, no questions about walking. Just 2 girls, a shaded table, and enough quiet for neither of them to feel observed. Sophie waited in her wheelchair beneath a maple tree, staring at the stone path as if it might ask something from her. Caroline stood 10 feet away with her phone in one hand and worry held tightly behind her eyes. Isaiah arrived with Nia beside him. He wore a plain navy shirt and carried 2 paper bags from a craft store. Nia did not introduce herself with the bright sympathy adults often used around Sophie. She sat at the table, opened one bag, and began folding a square of yellow paper. Sophie watched from the edge of her vision. "What are you making?" she finally asked. "I do not know yet," Nia said. "Sometimes the paper decides late." Sophie looked at Isaiah. He had taken a seat near the garden gate, far enough away to give the girls privacy, close enough to notice if the mood changed. He offered no encouragement. Nia folded one corner, then another. A crooked bird slowly appeared between her fingers. She placed it on the table without explanation and chose a blue sheet. Sophie rolled her chair closer. The front wheel caught briefly in a crack between the stones. Caroline stepped forward. Isaiah lifted one hand, not to stop her, but to ask for 1 second. Sophie adjusted the wheel herself and continued. Caroline remained where she was. Her phone vibrated. She looked down and saw Grant Holloway's name. The board wanted an emergency call about the video, which had already begun circulating beyond the company. Caroline's thumb hovered over the screen. Sophie noticed. The small openness in her face disappeared. Caroline remembered Nia's question at the diner. She turned the phone off and placed it face down on a bench. Sophie's shoulders lowered. It was barely a movement. Isaiah saw it. Caroline did too. Nia pushed the blue paper across the table. "This one can be yours." Sophie reached, but the sheet sat just beyond her fingertips. Nia did not move it closer. She did not challenge her either. She simply continued folding another bird. Sophie placed both palms on the arms of her wheelchair. Her breathing changed. Caroline felt every instinct inside her rise at once. Help her. Warn her. Call someone. Isaiah looked at Caroline, calm and steady. He did not shake his head. He trusted her to choose. Caroline kept her hands at her sides. Sophie pressed upward. Her knees trembled beneath the pale fabric of her dress, but she lifted herself several inches from the seat and leaned toward the table. The table shifted against the stone. Isaiah crossed the distance in 2 quiet steps and held its edge firmly. He did not touch Sophie. He did not praise her. He simply made sure the surface stayed where she expected it to be. Sophie took the blue paper and lowered herself back into the chair. Nia looked at the sheet in her hands. "Good color," she said. A smile appeared on Sophie's face, small and unprepared. Caroline turned away for a moment, not because she was ashamed of her tears, but because she did not want to make Sophie responsible for them. When she looked back, Isaiah had returned to the gate. The girls were folding paper side by side. No one had called it therapy. No one had called it progress. It was only an afternoon. Somehow, that made it matter more. Nia reached into Isaiah's jacket. Searching for a pencil she said he always carried. A worn leather wallet slipped onto the bench and opened. Inside, beside a photograph of Nia, was a small metal emblem Caroline recognized from the restricted file. Nia picked it up before Isaiah could. "You still carry this, Chief?" she asked. The garden became very still. Isaiah took the emblem gently and closed the wallet. Caroline studied his face. He had not reacted like a man whose secret had been exposed. He looked like a man who had hoped his past could remain quiet a little longer. Caroline did not ask about the emblem until Sophie and Nia had finished their paper birds and the afternoon light had begun to thin across the garden. Isaiah walked the girls toward the glass doors, one hand carrying the craft bags, the other resting near Nia without holding her. Caroline followed several steps behind. Her phone remained on the bench. For once, she did not miss it. Inside the lobby, an older board member named Thomas Reed stopped beside the security desk and stared at Isaiah as though a memory had just stepped out of the past. "Brooks?" he said. Isaiah turned. Thomas looked at the metal emblem now tucked partly inside the open wallet. His face changed. "Chief Isaiah Brooks." Nia glanced at her father. Caroline watched the silence settle around him. Isaiah closed the wallet. "That was a long time ago." Thomas stepped closer, careful but certain. "United States Navy Special Operations. Sea, Air, and Land Team. You coordinated civilian evacuations overseas." Isaiah's expression remained calm, but his shoulders became still. "I served. Then I came home." Grant Holloway appeared from the executive corridor, drawn by the gathering. His eyes moved from Thomas to Isaiah, then sharpened with immediate calculation. "This changes everything," Grant said. "A decorated veteran helping Sophie is exactly the story we need." Isaiah looked at him. "No," Grant gave a small laugh, as if refusal were only the first stage of negotiation. "You have not heard the proposal." "I heard enough." Caroline saw the familiar machinery turning behind Grant's polished smile. Public relations. Investor confidence. A heroic face placed beside the company logo. "People should know who you are," Grant continued. Isaiah glanced toward Sophie, who sat beside Nia folding the wing of a paper bird back into place. "People knew who I was yesterday. They just did not think it mattered." The words landed without force, which made them impossible to push away. Grant lowered his voice. "You could inspire millions. Then tell them to pay attention before they see a medal." No one answered. Thomas looked down, perhaps remembering every quiet worker he had passed without learning a name. Caroline studied Isaiah more closely. The restricted file had listed advanced response training, team leadership, and years spent entering unstable places to guide frightened people toward safety. Suddenly, every movement in the auditorium made sense. The exits, the lowered posture, the measured breathing, the way he had seen panic before it became visible. "Is that why you understood Sophie?" Caroline asked. Isaiah looked at her for a long moment. "The Navy taught me how to read a room. It taught me how to find a clear path when everyone else saw confusion." His eyes moved toward Nia. "It did not teach me how to reach a child." Nia stopped folding. Isaiah's voice softened. "After her mother died, Nia barely spoke to me for months. I tried schedules, counselors, routines, anything I could organize. I thought being prepared meant being useful." Nia looked down at the blue paper between her hands. "What changed?" Caroline asked. "I stopped trying to lead her out of grief." Isaiah rested one hand on the back of an empty chair. "I sat outside her bedroom every night. No questions, no advice. Sometimes for 2 hours, sometimes longer. One evening, she opened the door and sat beside me. That was all." Caroline felt something inside her loosen and ache at the same time. She had spent 3 years directing Sophie toward recovery, filling every silence with instructions because silence felt too much like failure. Isaiah had done the opposite. He had stayed. Grant still held his tablet, but even he had stopped typing. Isaiah looked at Caroline. "A uniform taught me when to move toward danger. My daughter taught me when love means staying still." Sophie lifted her paper bird and placed it in Caroline's hand. Caroline looked at the uneven wings, then at her daughter. Her phone began vibrating on the bench outside. This time, she let it ring until it stopped. By 8 the next morning, the video had escaped the building. It appeared first on a local news account, then spread across every major platform before Caroline reached her office. The clip lasted 23 seconds. It showed Sophie rising from her wheelchair beneath the Hayes Motion Labs logo, crossing the auditorium, and reaching Isaiah. What it did not show was the alarm, the blocked exit, or the frightened child searching for somewhere safe. A caption beneath the video called it a medical breakthrough. Another credited the company's newest mobility system, even though Sophie had not been using it. By 9, the company's stock had climbed. By 10, reporters filled the sidewalk outside. Grant Holloway entered Caroline's office carrying a tablet and the controlled excitement of a man watching a crisis turn profitable. Investor confidence is surging, he said. The board wants a press conference tomorrow. Caroline stood by the window, watching camera crews gather behind the barricades. Who released the footage? That is being reviewed. His answer arrived too smoothly. Caroline turned. That was not what I asked. Grant placed the tablet on her desk. A promotional image filled the screen. Sophie's face appeared beside the company logo, with Isaiah in the background and the words "Hope takes its first step." Caroline's expression hardened. Remove it. The board approved the campaign. My daughter did not. Grant lowered his voice. This is bigger than one family now. Hospitals are calling. Investors are calling. Parents are calling. Then tell them the truth. The truth needs structure. Later that afternoon, Isaiah entered the boardroom wearing the same plain navy shirt he had worn in the garden. 12 executives sat around the polished table. Caroline remained at the far end, silent, while Grant presented an offer. A senior safety position, a generous salary, national media appearances, a charitable program named in Isaiah's honor. All he had to do was confirm that the company's environment and equipment had helped Sophie walk. Isaiah looked at the contract, then at the enlarged photograph of Sophie displayed behind Grant. She was not using your equipment. Grant folded his hands. No one is asking you to lie. You are asking me to let people misunderstand. There is a difference. Not to the child being used. The room became still. Grant pushed a second document across the table. We can also provide long-term educational support for Nia. Isaiah did not touch it. Leave my daughter out of this. His voice remained low, but something in the room shifted. Caroline looked at him and remembered the blank check at the diner. He had refused money when no one was watching. He refused more now, with 12 powerful people waiting for him to become useful. Grant leaned back. You could help millions of children. Isaiah's gaze moved to Sophie's photograph. Then start by protecting one. A board member cleared his throat. Another looked toward Caroline. Grant followed their eyes. Caroline, perhaps you should explain what is at stake. Delaying the initial public offering could cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars. She felt every face turned toward her. Her phone vibrated beside her hand. For years, rooms like this had obeyed her because she never hesitated. Now Sophie's paper bird sat in the pocket of her coat, its uneven wings pressing against the fabric. Caroline opened her mouth, but no words came. Isaiah watched her. He did not plead. He did not accuse. His disappointment was quieter than anger and heavier than either. He stood and placed the unsigned contract on the table. Do not let your daughter's first steps become something other people own, he said. Then he walked out. The door closed softly behind him. Grant exhaled and turned toward Caroline. Tomorrow, we control the story. Caroline looked at Sophie's image on the screen and realized control was exactly what had brought them here. The press conference began at 11 the next morning beneath a wall of blue screens displaying the Hayes Motion Labs logo. Reporters filled every row. Television cameras faced the stage. Investors watched from private offices across the country. Grant Holloway stood near the podium with a prepared statement in one hand, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Caroline sat beside Sophie, who wore a soft gray sweater and held the blue paper bird Nia had helped her fold. Isaiah stood near the rear exit, not as an employee and not as a guest of honor. He had come only because Sophie had asked him to be there. Caroline had not slept. She had spent the night reading the campaign documents, the board approvals, and the internal messages Grant believed no one would question. Her daughter's medical notes had been reduced to talking points. Her fear had become market language. Her first steps had become a promise the company could sell. Grant approached the microphone. Today, Hayes Motion Labs is proud to share a remarkable story of innovation, courage, and hope. Applause rose on command. Sophie's fingers tightened around the paper bird. Camera shutters began clicking. One flash, then another. Her breathing changed. Caroline felt it before she saw it. Sophie looked toward the aisle, but 2 camera operators had moved into the open space. The exit no longer looked like an exit. It looked like another wall. Please give her room, Caroline said. No one heard. Grant continued speaking about recovery, possibility, and the future of mobility. Sophie pushed her hands against the arms of her wheelchair. For 1 second, Caroline thought she might stand. Instead, Sophie slipped forward and lowered herself onto the carpet, overwhelmed and unable to move. The room stirred. Reporters leaned closer. Every face turned toward Isaiah. He did not step forward. Caroline looked at him from across the stage. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a question. This was not his moment to rescue. It was hers. Caroline rose. She removed her high heels and left them beside the chair. Then she stepped away from the podium, crossed the stage in bare feet, and sat on the carpet several feet from her daughter. Grant stopped speaking. "Caroline," he whispered, "the cameras are live." She looked toward the press. "Turn them off." No one moved. Grant reached for her arm, but stopped before touching her. "We cannot shut down a national broadcast." Caroline faced him. "My daughter is not a broadcast." Her voice carried through the microphone still clipped to her jacket. The room fell silent. She looked at the camera crews again. "Turn them off now." One red light disappeared. Then another. A photographer lowered his camera. The room softened by degrees. Caroline placed her phone on the floor between herself and Sophie. The screen lit with incoming calls. She turned it face down. "For in," she said quietly. Her voice trembled on the first count. She tried again. "For in. Hold. For out." Sophie lifted her eyes. Caroline kept breathing. She did not ask her to stand. She did not promise anything. She stayed. Behind them, Grant spoke in a low, urgent tone about the initial public offering, the board, and the cost of stopping. Caroline did not turn around. "My daughter does not owe this company one more step," she said. The sentence moved through the room more powerfully than any prepared statement. Sophie placed one hand on the carpet, then the other. She shifted her knees beneath her and slowly rose. Caroline remained seated. She let Sophie choose the distance. One step came, then another. Not toward Isaiah, not toward the cameras. Sophie walked directly to her mother and placed both arms around her neck. Caroline closed her eyes. Across the room, Isaiah lowered his head, not in triumph, but in quiet respect. He had shown Caroline how to become a place her daughter could return to. This time, she had stayed still long enough for Sophie to find her. 3 weeks after the press conference, the blue screens were gone from the auditorium. The promotional campaign had been withdrawn, and the initial public offering had been postponed without a new date. The board opened an internal investigation into the use of Sophie's medical information. Grant Holloway submitted his resignation before the final report was completed. He left the building through a side entrance without cameras, speeches, or applause. Caroline did not celebrate. She had learned that removing one man did not repair a culture built to reward silence. She ordered every department to review how patient stories were collected, approved, and shared. Parents would control their children's images. Medical progress would never be treated as advertising. No child would be placed before investors as proof that a product worked. The changes cost the company money. Several board members warned that competitors would take advantage. Caroline listened without interrupting, then signed the new policies anyway. For the first time in her career, losing control of the market felt less frightening than losing her daughter's trust. Sophie continued physical therapy 3 mornings each week. Some days, she walked several feet with support. Some days, she remained in her wheelchair and folded paper birds with Nia. No one called either kind of day a failure. Caroline attended whenever Sophie wanted her there. She sat without a laptop. Her phone stayed inside her purse. Silence no longer felt like an empty room she had to fill. It felt like permission. Isaiah returned to Hayes Motion Labs only after Caroline stopped offering him titles that sounded important. She found him one afternoon in the rehabilitation garden, drinking black coffee from a paper cup while Nia and Sophie argued over whether a purple bird could represent courage. Caroline sat beside him and placed a thin folder on the bench. "This is not a public relations position," she said. Isaiah looked at the first page. The proposal created a family support program focused on safety, consent, emotional recovery, and patient choice. Parents would receive training in how to recognize distress without turning every difficult moment into an emergency. Children would be allowed to set boundaries, refuse cameras, and participate without being treated like demonstrations. "You want me to run it," Isaiah said. "I want you to help build it." He turned another page. The salary was fair, not extravagant. There was no photograph of him, no mention of his military record, and no promise that his name would appear on the building. "I have one condition," he said. Caroline waited. No child is required to improve, so an adult can feel successful. Caroline took a pen from her purse and wrote the sentence across the top of the proposal. Then it becomes the first rule. Isaiah signed. Months later, the garden looked different. The cameras were gone. The pathways had been widened. Quiet spaces rested beneath the trees. Sophie stood near a low wooden rail, while Nia waited several feet away with a paper bird balanced on her palm. Caroline and Isaiah watched from the bench. Sophie took one step, then another. Her knee weakened, and she lowered herself carefully to the ground. Caroline's body leaned forward by instinct. Then she stopped. Sophie placed both hands on the rail and rose again on her own. She looked toward her mother, not for rescue, but to make sure she was still there. Caroline smiled. Isaiah lifted his coffee, now cold, and took a slow drink. "Did the Navy teach you to wait like that?" Caroline asked. He looked at Nia, then at Sophie. "No," he said. "Being a father did." Caroline's phone vibrated inside her purse. She left it there, in front of them. Sophie reached Nia and took the paper bird. No one applauded. No one recorded it. The moment belonged only to the people who had stayed.